Hello, and welcome to your OSL640 Week 3 Lesson 1 video, where we're going to look at Advanced File Management. There's, as always, two lesson videos. I'm splitting them up appropriately just to make things a little bit easier for viewing purposes. So in this first video, we're going to look at different types of path names. Absolute path names, relative relative to home path names, and I'll give you a demonstration of all of those, and maybe this will make sense a little bit. And all of this maps to Investigation 1 in Week 3 tutorial, or Tutorial 3, and the review questions 1 to 8. I'll also warn you, you may see references to, well, ULI 101, which is not our course in the slide. It is what it is. I left it in because I figured there were demo purposes, and it was okay to leave in. We talked about path names briefly previously in a previous lecture, and we mentioned that they are, or we learned, rather, that they are fully specified locations of a unique file system, or a unique file name within the file system. The concept of path names works the same well, more or less in every operating system, but the concept relates to every operating system, whether it's Unix, Linux, DOS, Windows, Mac, doesn't matter. You still have different ways of representing path names. Last week we actually used a path name from our home directory to create and manipulate different directories and text files. So there's different types of path names that we can use to access directories or text files. So for example, this is for the cars.txt file, which is in the ULI 101 directory in this particular example. So we can refer to it as an absolute, or in an absolute path name, an absolute method, and you'll always know it's an absolute path because it begins with a slash, which means from root, right? So home, user ID, ULI 101, cars.txt is an absolute path to that on the system. You'd also have a relative path, so samples cars.txt, and this is looking within your current directory for the directory called samples. Within there, there's a cars.txt file. And finally, relative to home, which always begins with a tilde. So tilde / cars.txt means in your home directory, cars.txt. Which one is the correct one to use? It depends on what you're doing. If you want to be absolutely certain that you're referring to the exact file, then you may need an absolute path name. If you want to be certain it's going into the right home directory or right user's home directory, you may want to use a relative to home. And other times a relative path name may work perfectly fine. So it depends on the context of what you're doing. So being able to look at these and use these equally will make you a little bit more efficient. So sometimes you can use one over the other, and it will result in a lot less or a lot fewer keystrokes for users to type when you're issuing your commands. But the main differences you're looking at, if it begins with a tilde, tilde, it's a relative to home path. If it begins with a slash, it's an absolute path, and anything else is relative, which is relative to where you are in the file system. So let's look at each of those individually. Absolute paths are, well, they're an absolute path to a file or directory. So they begin from root, which is represented by a slash. This type of path name is referred to as absolute because it always begins absolutely from the root directory, regardless of where you are in the file system. So it specifies the full path name starting with the root directory and each subdirectory. So just an easy way to remember this is if it's absolute, it begins with root, which of course you represent by a slash. Absolute path names can be advantageous in certain contexts. They're usually, I find I've used them most when it comes to writing scripts to automate different things, and if I'm including a file in my script that has a library of functions in it or something, or exporting some data to a text file and I want to know exactly where it's going, then I'll make it an absolute path. So the advantages of these are, well, if you don't know where your current directory is, you're guaranteed the what you're trying to do is going to end up or come from that exact place. They also tend to help you understand directory layouts a little bit and the full path name. So some examples of absolute directories. Well, we have bin, which we learned about last week, and home, user ID, ULI 101 examples. Again, we know they're absolute because they begin with root, or they begin with a slash. Relative path names, by contrast, are paths to files or directories that begin with your current directory. So it's relative because it's relative to where you are in the file system. And an important note about these, in order to use a relative path name, you have to know where they are in your where you are, your current directory. So we talked about a command a couple weeks ago that might be useful in this. Does anyone remember what it is? I'll give you a second to pause the video, see if you can guess. So that command is pwd. So relative, from these particular locations would depend on things. There's a couple special symbols, and I think we looked at one of these briefly, but now you'll understand fully what it means. A single. Remember when we did an ls-l? We always see a single dot and two dots, right? Those two special directories. Well, they're actually special symbols. A single dot is always used to represent the current directory, and two periods or two dots represents the parent directory, or one level up. So the advantages of using these is shorter path names, less typing. The trade-off is you have to know where you are, of course. So for example, dot dot slash dot dot slash dot dot slash bin would be one level up, one level up, one level up, bin. So again, the deeper you get into directories, this can get a little tricky. That's one of the drawbacks. Examples would of course refer to the file or directory examples within your current directory. And dot slash examples means the exact same thing. From the current directory examples. Relative to home paths, always begin, as we mentioned, with the tilde, which is used to represent the current user's home directory. And you can actually, if you do this, I'm going to show you quick for a second. You can actually, if we use the echo command and tilde, it will give us our home directory, which of course that's my user's home directory. It's kind of interesting. So advantages of these, again, could be shorter, or could be less typing, shorter path names. Could be very useful. And you can also place a username immediately after the tilde to represent another user's directory. So for example, tilde Jane, and without a slash, would mean Jane's home directory. So some examples of these, based on our output here, we've got tilde slash ULI 101 slash examples, tilde slash ULI 101 slash notes, and tilde Murray Saul slash ULI 101 slash notes. So this would be in Murray's directory. These would be in your home directory. So let's have a look at some examples of how to use these. Oops. I want that there. So I'm in not where I want to be. Hold on a minute. There. I thought I prepped all this, and I missed something. So I'm in the demo directory in my OSL640 in my Matrix account in my home directory, which we've used this a few times now. You'll note I cleaned it up a little bit. I got rid of anything that we're not using. Technically, I could get rid of those too, and I'm actually just going to do that now, just to make things easier. So, I'm going to create some directories, and we're going to create 4 directories using different ways of referencing them. So mkdir notes is just going to create the notes directory in my current directory, and I can do an ls to confirm. Sorry, my dog is going crazy right now. I'm not sure what about. I'm also going to create, so I'm going to create 3 directories in here: notes, tutorials, and examples. I'm going to make the examples directory using a relative to home path name, just so you can see the difference. Sorry, tutorials. I think I said notes, and I meant tutorials. Maybe I said tutorials, I'm not sure. And I'm going to do an ls to confirm, so we see we have 2 directories. And then finally I'm going to make a directory called examples using an absolute path name. So you can see a lot more typing involved. And there we go. I'm also going to create a new directory and call it sample. And we'll do an ls to confirm. Notice I'm doing a lot of LS's and clearing today. So I'm going to just remove that sample dir directory, or sample directory, and do an ls to confirm. So we can see yeah, worked as intended. So I'm going to create now 3 different files using relative paths, each in each of these subdirectories. So touch, tutorials, tutorial 3, note 3. No. I was thinking on my feet doing this, and that's not a good idea. We're just going to use 1, just to keep things simple. And I'm going to do an ls. Note we can't see anything. I could do an ls of each one individually, or I can just do a tree. And there we go. So now I'm going to move tutorial 1 from the tutorials directory into the notes directory. And you may find as you're working with these through the tutorial, it might be useful to have 2 terminals open side by side, and have one where you just continually end up issuing the tree command, and the other one for doing your work. That's what I found when I was first using or first learning Linux. It was very, very useful because I'm fairly visual in learning, as most people are. So we're going to move using a relative to home path. from the OSL640 demo tutorials, tutorial 1, into notes. And if we do an ls notes, there we go, we have note 1 and tutorial 1 now inside notes. I could also ls using a relative to home path. And an absolute path. And you can see that was substantially more typing. But this one requires me to be in the demo directory. So depending on where you are, you're going to use one of these in context. And you can mix and match these as well. So I'm going to copy using a relative path, tutorial 1, to the tutorial directory, just to restore it to, restore a copy of it to where it is, using a relative to home path. And I can ls both of these. I'm not sure if you realized you could do this. And you'll get the output for multiple directories with the ls command if you specify multiple directories. Which could be kind of useful. Now we're going to remove that one from notes. And let's take a look at our notes directory just to confirm. And then finally, we're going to remove, we'll use an absolute again, or absolutely relative to home. Getting mixed up in my terminology as I'm doing this. We'll do an ls and a tree. I don't know what on earth is going on with my Windows VM. There we go. So we can see we still have some files here. And this is just an example. I'm just going to clean everything up for our next sample. So I'm just going to get rid of everything. And do an ls to confirm. There we go. I needed the asterisk there. That's why it didn't work. Which we're actually going to learn about a little later in the semester what that does. Or a little later in the semester. A little later in this lecture. So you can get some practice with both of these, or all of these, in this week's tutorial, tutorial 3, investigation 1. Which that's actually not the right title in the slides. So it's absolute, relative, and relative to home path names. This is right, this is not. And practice questions 1 to 8 directly map to that. So that brings us to the end of lesson 1. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in our lesson 2 video. Possibly in a few moments, possibly a little later, depending on when you're watching these.